anyone you talk to, whether they're Korean or non-Korean, when you ask them like, hey, what's your impression or what's Korean food to you? The common words would be fried chicken, Korean barbecue, kimchi. Why do you think that is? How has that come to define what Korean food is?
Like in Korea, it's a gathering thing. You go out and you go to Korean barbecue. So that whole, the relatability aspect and the gathering aspect. Like it's not even just the Korean thing, the barbecue. Like it's white Australia, it's barbecue.
Australia Day barbecues.
You know, like Argentinians that have the barbecue. Like,
for you personally, what does Korean food represent? What
history.
does it mean to you? History of your life, or history of the country, or your family's history? What kind of history?
I think history defines who we are today. We are what we eat, but it's also like...
What are we? Are we
food is
the chicken or the pig?
Food is history. Food, like, you know, revolutions happen for food. Wars happen for food.
So I'm really interested, when you started your journey with Shik, right? You would have had to start wrestling with those questions, I imagine. Like, how are you going to make this one dish? How are you going to approach it? What's the best way, in a business way, to approach it? What's the most authentic approach to it? How did you wrestle with that?
Everyone thinks Korean food is a dish. It is a technique. It is an ingredient. Korean food is for me, it's a philosophy.
Okay.
It's a way of life.
Way of life represent for you?
Surviving.
Right.
That survival mentality. Because like before we didn't have that many cows or chickens. You know, we didn't have that much refrigeration. We didn't have modern technology and modern science to help us control what we do. Because I think...
Are you talking post-war period? Or after?
I'd say post-war was probably the biggest, like the most influential event.
Yeah.
But I think, you know, the Japanese...
You know, you have this history of Korea being taken over by Japan, essentially our culture, our language being forcibly wiped out, an attempt to wipe out our Korean language, our Korean history, our Korean culture, our way of life, our way of family. And that attempt has definitely created in us a sense of resilience, this hun, right? This sense of wanting to be the best, wanting to overcome, wanting to be resilient. And I guess you're right. Like, food does not come down to the ingredients. It comes down to the history, and it comes down to,
for me,
that survival. And I love the way that you've pitted the Korean history as one of a story of survival.
Opening Shik, I said my food was going to be Korean Australian because I was using Australian produce, like local produce, and I was like, that's the Australian part of it. And I also said that I am Australian at the end of the day. But then, like, recently I've just been like, what identifies me as an Australian? Because even my food, when I said I was using local produce, but then I ended up finding every single ingredient with a Korean name.
Right.
Even like wild greens that are foraged. Like, Koreans will be like, oh, that's not Korean. I'm like, well, it has a Korean name. So what are you doing?
I kind of tend to fluctuate between, when I think about food as identity construction, I really fluctuate because I think, you know what? It's what I make it up to be.
Yeah.
My dad went to high school in Australia, in a part of Sydney that was like super white. I've seen him integrate Korean food, like my grandma's cooking, with a bunch of different other flavors. So sometimes he'd have like shinlangan with KFC. Sometimes he'd have a bite of a kebab but eat it with kimchi. Like, it's so flexible for him, and that was when I started to get a glimpse of, look, it's your own taste. It's whatever you want to mix and match it. But on a national level, on a marketing sense, how accurate is it to start labeling food as fusion?
Our national dish, kimchi.
Yeah.
So cabbage wasn't never ours, chili was never ours, and garlic was never ours.
Okay.
So that is fusion in a sense. Just recorded kimchis, and it's really vague, was lettuce or eggplant. And there was no garlic or chili at that time.
Wow.
And there's also, some records say there was a beef broth involved in it.
Does not sound like kimchi at all.
No, it doesn't.
What about the commercialization aspect of kimchi, or making money from stocking cafes, running cooking lessons, running dishes that feature kimchi? Is that a good thing, bad thing? Do people not care? What are the effects of it? And I mean, we're having these conversations because sometimes it's worthwhile, in my opinion, like stopping to actually think about like what are our actions actually, what kind of impact is it having? Like,
is it a bad
Korean
thing?
pizza.
Yes. Is it a good thing? Yes.
Okay. That's good. Yeah.
I don't really understand what cultural appropriation is anymore.
You know what? To be honest, people apply it for a lot of different things. Like my understanding, or the best understanding that I have of it, is when a dominant culture will then take parts of a minority's culture, pick and choose what they want to keep and the rest, with disrespect and disregard to the rest of it. So, for example, they could take kimchi and be like, yeah, I quite like this, quite think it's healthy, but I'm going to disregard the history, the process, the tradition behind it, or what it represents. And I think not giving it its due is a form of cultural appropriation.
But what's the due that needs to be given?
I don't know. What was the biggest personal learning for you after closing your restaurant?
I learned that ego is still a big part of Shik. Like, I was getting angry at people saying my food wasn't Korean. Why do I have to be justified by someone else?
Sure.
And it's Korean when I've spent my past 10 years of my life getting to that.
That's actually a really good point. I guess it's, you felt boxed in a sense. Like, hey, like if I want to put anything, or if I want to put whatever on the menu for whatever reason, let me. Whether you think it's Korean or not.
Yeah, like you said, people like try to label my food, oh, it's modern Korean, it's fusion Korean. It's like, I'm talking about history right now.
Right.
Like, how does that become modern?
The idea of a Korean chef. Should you just be a chef that cooks Korean? Or a business owner that has a Korean restaurant? Or why has labels started to become, oh, he's a Korean businessman, or he's a Korean, okay. Does
For
it
me,
help
it's
with your
marketing. I think so. I think one of my greatest weaknesses was the marketing side of Shik. Because marketing talks about relatability, approachability. Nothing about Shik was approachable or relatable.
Why do you think that is?
What's Korean barbecue on my restaurant when I cooked it for you? Why is my kimchi personal, not cabbage? Like, why is there this green that I've never heard of before?
Right.
Like, a lot of Koreans like very 착한 맛.
Ah, yeah.
I think Japanese are masters of nature, whereas Koreans, where we were conveyors of and messengers of nature through our food. If it was bitter, we'd let it be bitter.
Yeah.
On the table. Whereas today's cooking, it's not about that. So if it's bitter, add sugar, make it balance the bitter out.
See, right.
Because I don't look at it as a chef. I don't think about the training of balance. It's just, I look at history and I try to look through that.
Right.